joys of putting this forum, rather grandly named Forum TV program or schedule together, is that there are so many interesting forum members, all right at the top of their game, to have discussions with, and I think that's been a real value. And Thomas today, a psychologist by training, runs Ad Altius Advisors. He's been locked down in Texas for quite a while, but he's now talking to us from San Francisco. So Thomas, good morning to you. Thank you for getting up so early and joining us here. And
my pleasure.
We're crises always create opportunities, and we thought this was a good title to talk about. And I was just saying to Thomas actually that I remember it was exactly this time last year when the crisis first came upon most of us, and we were all starting to be locked down. And I took the opportunity to speak to every single forum member over a sort of 8-9 week period. And during this particular time, i.e. sort of mid-April, forum members were very concerned about the immediate future. And that was about resettling their families, both indirect and direct. It was about their businesses, it was about their staff, it was about the potential loss of revenue. And then when we got to about the beginning of May, the conversation started to change, and it was all about what are the opportunities. And it was very marked. And I remember sort of thinking about it over a 2 or 3 day period, that suddenly now no one was talking about the difficulties of the crisis. Everyone was talking about what are the opportunities. We need to know, who's doing what. Simon, have you spoken to so-and-so? I'd love to know what he's doing or what she's doing. What are the opportunities out there? So a year on, here we are, and who better to talk to than Thomas? And Thomas, this is very much your area. So set the scene for us. Set the scene for this conversation. Crises always create opportunities. And so why is this so, do you believe?
Well, I think you've just described it, Simon. And first I'll say thank you for your kind introduction. It's great to be here. And I want to telegraph to everyone on the call a sense of optimism and enthusiasm here from the United States, where I say the business renaissance is already beginning. So to your question, the dynamic that you described, Simon, is what one always sees with a crisis. That is, that there is always a period of shock and disorientation in a true crisis. And that's true whether it's a stock market rout or it's a bomb going off in Times Square, or in our case, a global pandemic. So whenever there is a sharp and acute and sudden onset of danger, people are stunned. They're grappling to make sense of it. Think of that example, a bomb going off in Times Square. People don't understand what's happened. But there's also a behavioral phenomenon that I refer to as fear contagion. So it's not a metaphor, but it's very apt given the contagion of COVID-19. But moods are highly contagious as well. And the most contagious mood is fear. It has some strong evolutionarily adaptive elements to it. And if you think about a situation, say you're in a crowded stadium and you're jam-packed into a stadium, and the people immediately around you suddenly are terrified, visibly terrified. You don't know why, you only know that they're terrified. You too will involuntarily become terrified. This is how nature has built us. And I spoke about this in the 5-minute forum recordings that you did around this time, because I was seeing it everywhere, that people were really lapsing into moods of terror, sometimes without justification and certainly without rationale in some cases. So when that happens, those who are able to regain their balance more quickly are able to seize the day. This is something that can give people distinct competitive advantages when you're the first person to move in the wake of that bomb going off.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I definitely want to come back on that, if I may, in terms of how I think our various governments are continuing to apportion a little bit of fear in amongst the populace, and how they're using that to control us, and to a certain extent. But we'll come back to that. But in terms of the business opportunities that are out there, again, when I've spoken to you before, you've talked about the opportunities for this pandemic being particularly unique. I mean, after all, we're not suffering from the aftermath of a war or a financial crisis. So what is it about this pandemic, do you think, that where the opportunities are unique, particularly with a business sense?
Sure. Let me draw a contrast to highlight what's different about this crisis. So if we carry the premise that crisis creates a period of disorientation, you have fear contagion, and it causes that stadium to clear out, in the metaphor I used. To draw a contrast with a comparison point that's frequently been invoked in the pandemic's been compared to World War II in terms of its impact on business and people's lives and so forth. And there, where you sit in the United Kingdom, there were people who were able to step into that vacuum. World War II ended, London lay in ruins, and it needed to be rebuilt. And there was a developer by the name of Jack Goldhill, who prior to the war faced all kinds of barriers in his career because he was Jewish. But in the wake of that empty stadium, he was able to step in, be a first mover, and effectively rebuild London, and catapulted his family to great wealth. And that, his family today is some of the greatest philanthropists in the United Kingdom. What's different about this crisis is that there isn't a discrete endpoint. So there's not a truce that's signed that says the war is over, that the pandemic has officially ended as of today. And that's going to create a sense of global PTSD. So if you think about PTSD on the individual level, it's lingering effects of fear that continue to impact behavior even after the original point of danger has dissipated or perhaps is gone altogether. So in this instance, where we don't have a discrete endpoint, there's going to be a massive sense of global PTSD. And people who understand that PTSD are going to be able to move quickly and exploit those advantages. Those who don't understand it will get left behind by those who do. So that stadium is cleared out, and there's going to be a lot of reluctance to step back in, perhaps long after it's safe to do so. And the people who see that and see the ungrounded hesitancy on the part of some of their compatriots will have an advantage over those who do. So that is the primary differentiator in this crisis, that it doesn't have a discrete endpoint, creating some behavioral advantages.
Okay, so I want to ask this government question now, which is the role of government. We had Hui Hua Lim from Singapore talk to us a few weeks ago, and defining the role of government, where it needs to set down, be very clear in its objectives, and set down long-term plans. But with regard to what you're talking about, the fear contagion, do you think that there's an element of a number of governments, I'm talking in particular the United Kingdom, using the fear contagion to its own advantage? It's that situation where they've been very quick to take civil liberty away, but perhaps I fear quite slow to give it back. And fear is one of the rules by which they can continue to maintain control.
I do think governments are making use of fear contagion, whether it's intentional or not. And I think more sophisticated governments are making intentional use of it. It's related to a phenomenon I was discussing at a forum breakfast in London, just a casual conversation with some members, perhaps some on this call, where I have long felt that with the rise of social media, that entities are making use of the fact that just as sex sells advertising, so does fear, so does anger. And something to note, fear and anger are the same emotion biologically. The only difference is a cognitive shift. So if people are heavily defended, they're primed towards one of those emotions. And so this is where I'll give a somewhat charitable spin to what sounds like your skepticism, maybe even a little cynicism about governments, Simon, that I think that if people are heavily defended, our chief emotional and mood defense mechanisms are anger and fear. It does this, right? If I'm afraid of you, I might be angry, I can neutralize you. And on the other hand, I could be afraid and I can run away. It neutralizes the threat. If I am a world leader, it's much better for my populace to be afraid than angry, because if they're angry, we have problems like we've seen in my country. We have riots, we have fires, we have looting, we have all kinds of problems. And it is an effective means of behavioral control. And I will grant you license to have skepticism and cynicism, because I do think sometimes our leaders make use of it in ways that suit their own purposes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll move off that subject of mine, my sort of pet hobby horse at the moment. Although I see Peter Osborne reminding me that Joseph Goebbels was the minister of fear. Anyway, enough done. Let's get back to business and transformation of business in particular. How do you think businesses are going to transform? Give us your overview on that.
Sure. I think just as people have first mover advantage, that stadium is cleared out, and people have this global PTSD and they're reluctant to come back in, that gives the Jack Goldhills of the world the opportunity to come in, put a stake in the ground, and establish a footing, whereas it might have been impossible previously. I think there's a few things. There's some financial mechanistic things. Prior to the pandemic, a big story in the financial press were these trillions and trillions of pent-up dollars, dry powder that's undeployed. Now, this existed prior to the pandemic. And so this still is the case. And now you're going to have that combined with an empty stadium. So I think you're going to see an unleashing of those dollars, and there's going to be a tsunami of deal-making activity, the likes of which we've probably never seen in our lifetime. So first, volume of transaction, I think we're going to see a sharp uptick, and we're already seeing signs of that here in the United States. Second, I think there's going to be a real behavioral transformation of businesses. So I'll give a non-business example, but one that everybody will have familiarity with. I don't think it's by accident that the Black Lives Matter movement has come into its ascendancy now during the pandemic. I mean, BLM as a movement is more than 8 years old. Yet many on this call may not have heard of it until this year. It may not have really penetrated their consciousness. And I believe the reason that happened, in addition to the tragic events here in my country, in Minnesota, but it was that empty stadium that created the opportunity. This is a social movement whose motivations have remained constant and steadfast for many years. So the tragic cases in Minnesota, those things have been happening for years, which is kind of the point. It was that empty stadium where suddenly people can walk in, shout at the top of their lungs, and not be drowned out. What this has to do with business is that there is a similar opportunity that I believe people will exploit to change the ethics, practices, and values that are embodied in business. And I think that we're going to see, as people re-enter that stadium, competing for the same resources that previously weren't available, we're going to see new coalitions, new kinds of coalitions formed. So in the past, you look at interest-based coalitions, that is, people who share a common economic or financial interest, versus identity-based coalitions, where people band together because of a shared identity. Maybe it's race, maybe it's national identity, what have you. The former, typically those are much more lucrative interest-based coalitions, but identity-based coalitions are typically much more stable. I predict what's going to happen is that as people re-enter that stadium, we're going to have interest-based coalitions formed. But in addition to that, there's going to be a layer of matching based on ethics, values, practices. And that's going to lend stability to interest-based coalitions, unlike what we've seen before.
How interesting. How interesting. I never thought of it like that at all. So ethics and values come more to the fore.
I think in terms of the formation of partnerships, I think it's going to go far beyond the sort of frenemy relationships that we've seen in the past. I think you're going to see businesses and coming together in partnerships and joint ventures and the like at the macro level and at the individual level.
Is this a more responsible capitalism?
I think so, because I think just as Black Lives Matter was a movement that has existed for many years, likewise, prior to the pandemic, we've seen, to use your term, responsible capitalism as sort of an ideal, where you look at the rise of impact investing and social responsibility. And I believe that it's entirely possible that certainly with the pandemic, but even before, that just as we have standard metrics of corporate performance, whether it's PE ratios, what have you, I think it's entirely possible that we will see measures of social responsibility as well. And there are those that have that agenda. And if they happen to enter the stadium first, their voices are going to be heard.
That's a different kettle of fish.
Oh, we've got somebody else on the...
Sorry, that's Marta. Sorry, that's me. Sorry.
Hi, Marta.
Oh, that takes me back to the old days when we used to get cross lines. Do you remember them? And you would listen in
I do.
Far longer than you should have done, but you just sort of did,
So listen, Simon, I think there are going to be specific industries, of course, that are affected. If that's what you're looking for, I
want to ask you, what are the sectors we should be looking out for? What sectors are we going to get excited about now?
Well, I think not knowing the spectrum of interest, I'm just looking at the audience, and I don't know everyone's business interests. I in a perfect world, I could tailor my response to individual interests, but I'll say this in a general way. I think the broad categories to watch are those sectors that have been heavily affected, but will come back. So that's one. And the other are those sectors heavily affected, but are portable. And so I'll give an example for each. In industries that have been significantly affected, but will come back, two. Hospitality is one. And subdivisions of hospitality, hotels, for example, restaurants, for example. And there's no questioning, there's no analysis I've heard that questions the resurgence of both of those sectors. There's this pent-up demand for travel, particularly leisure travel. We're already seeing it unleashed among those who are vaccinated here in the United States. People are tired of cooking. So there's going to be we're going to see dislocations, but moving in the opposite direction now, where demand is going to far outpace supply. So that's going to create lots of opportunities. We're already seeing special purpose funds constituted to exploit those opportunities in dining and in hospitality. In the example of the category where industries are portable, advertising has been significantly affected, as it always is in times of crisis, that people draw back their marketing spend. But advertising is quite portable, right? And so at first you saw that portability, a lot of it migrated to online advertising, where you might glance at your screen and you see ads or your phone and what have you. I predict there's going to be a significant migration. We're seeing it in the United States. I'm seeing it in some of my portfolio, where there's a migration to other media, such as out-of-home advertising, billboards, outdoor furniture, because it's people who are cooped up migrate outside. And I think that's going to create tremendous opportunities. You look in your backyard, Simon Jacot, for example, is a large advertiser, which I think you're going to see massive upsurge in that sector. So it's those that are suppressed that will rebound, and those that are portable, and that's going to drive the rebound.
Okay, good. If we have any questions, please put them in the sidebar or put your hand up, and we'll come to you. Interestingly, we talked to Elizabeth Linder the other day, and I asked her the same question, and she thought she responded that tech companies that deliver a lifestyle would be a really interesting sector to look at, or particular area of tech to look out for. I think she just bought herself a Peloton bike at the time, and but she was making that point that and Daniel Schwartz, I might ask you if you've got a point on this, but she was making that point that those companies that emerge now and make us feel better and deliver us a lifestyle and can scale, they would be particularly interesting in terms of potential investment or just watching out for. So
I think that's a very valid point, because if you've got that empty stadium and it's going to be filled again, what's holding people back in their collective PTSD are lingering effects of fear. That we've all globally experienced a legitimate trauma. And so if people are able to enter that stadium and offer things that bring comfort and reassurance, and that could include things like lifestyle. I mean, the Peloton's a good example, because this is about health and wellness, and what could be more timely. And it's really going to be determined, Simon, by who enters the stadium first, because and those who perhaps have had the same message but have been drowned out in the chorus heretofore, if they enter that stadium now, that gives them distinct advantages to advance their message.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this empty stadium analogy. It's very interesting. So I've got a question in here from Michael. Michael, are you happy to come forward and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Simon. Hi, Thomas. One of the things that we're seeing during the pandemic is all of this public spending, huge amounts of public spending, not just the US, but everywhere. And in Europe, if I can still call the UK Europe, we see this as a bit of an opportunity as far as investment is concerned. However, I'd love to hear how the US is looking at this. Massive spending in healthcare, infrastructure, and so on, much needed spending, but investors in the US are looking at this as a risk or as an opportunity?
The investors that I know view it as an opportunity, and I would bucketize the people in my network into two groups. One is those who view it as a near-term opportunity. So you're seeing massive investment or intention for massive investment in infrastructure, as you note. And there are those who, of course, want to exploit those near-term opportunities. They want to be doing the work of building the roads, the highways, the bridges, and so forth, the infrastructure investment. Some of those with a longer view, the second bucket of investors that I talk to, are particularly interested in the sort of creaking and groaning of the financial model that happens when you're in massive deficit spending. And if you've got a certain amount of capital spread around and it's rather thin at some point, that creates opportunities for other people to come in and pick up the slack. And so I am seeing those that are making longer term bets in terms of where they anticipate the government will have to pull back. Because here in the United States, it's pretty predictable where our government pulls back in social programs, pulls back in science, pulls back in the arts. And there's entrepreneurial opportunities in all of those areas when the government starts to pull back, when there's some contraction resulting from deficit spending. Is that responsive to your question, Michael?
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Tom.
Good.
And so Marta, good to see you there. Come on in and ask your question.
Yeah, Thomas, I just wrote, I really don't smell the fear in the family office community.
Right.
Business family owning families, particularly those in Asia and Australia, have been using this lockdown period to reposition themselves, and they're getting ready to pull the trigger on new investments. Now, maybe that's a characterization, particularly of Asian families who are always looking at 10 years plus. So for them, this is a bump in the road,
Yeah.
and they are motoring on.
Yeah.
I don't see it. And I agree with Michael on the point that I think the governments are going to be more welcoming of public-private partnerships for two reasons. One, they need to get the motor running in their countries in various sectors. And secondly, they realize that if they help to generate new businesses, that will generate a new source of revenue for them. For me, the biggest fright out there, the big fright is the tax bills that are going to be coming hard and fast within 2 years. And not just here in the UK, but also globally, wherever these governments have been spending trillions, it's got to come from somewhere.
Yes, and Marta, it's good to see you. And
same here.
And I haven't seen you in forever.
Yeah.
So it's good to see your face. And as you know, I'm pretty deeply involved with the family office community, in mostly here in the United States, but to a certain extent in Europe. And I am seeing similar things. So I agree with your point that the family office community at this moment is not lost in fear contagion. And in some respects, they are the people who are trickling back into the stadium. Now, early on, they were caught up in the fear contagion, at least those to which I'm connected, because everyone's got this sense of what the hell is going on. Everyone's terrified, probably with good reason. Let's protect ourselves. Part of why we're seeing the family office community trickle back into the stadium ahead of everyone else is because I've got a way of thinking about wealth, and wealth for me is not a pile of currency. It includes that, but wealth really is about distance from danger. And so wealth gives you, a pile of currency gives you some distance from danger, but there are other determinants of wealth, such as network, and there's a whole raft of things, and I've written about this extensively. So family offices, particularly those that are mature, say beyond G2, for instance, have well-developed practices for intergenerational transmission of wealth and so forth, and they are well insulated from danger. This gives them the ability to move into the stadium for others, that they can surmount that PTSD that other people are affected because they're less vulnerable. And I think they will be, and in fact, I am seeing it, be a driver of some of the activity in some of the very sectors I've described. So I'm seeing a lot of family office activity in hotels. I'm seeing a lot of family office activity in advertising, particularly out-of-home advertising. To one of Simon's points, I'm seeing a lot of it in tech. And I'm also seeing it, to my point about the opportunity to transform ethics, values, and practices. I'm seeing a lot of values-driven investments made by family offices. And they're really at the vanguard of this values-driven investing. And I think particularly with the younger generation, like millennials, even the generation behind that, where this is such a central part, this is a movement that's not going to go away and is likely to exponentiate in the wake of the pandemic.
So Thomas, we've hit our half hour, but I'm just, for those of you, if you would like to stay on for just a couple more minutes, because I want to ask Thomas that question, particularly as you're talking about family offices there, about what about the people who get left behind? We're a privileged circle in this group here, but what about, what are we going to do for those people who are going to get left behind?
Well, thanks for asking that question. And I'm a business therapist, but I am a psychologist first, and it's a helping profession. And I think about those who are trapped in PTSD, that are stuck in crisis response mode. And just from a place of compassion, the first thing I say is the way we can help them is I draw on the teachings of Viktor Frankl, whom you know suffered horrendous, unspeakable trauma. He was in Auschwitz, lost his entire family, and what he credits with enabling him to survive and indeed flourish after that trauma ended was his ability to find meaning. And so the first thing I would say is, for those in our networks, how we can help them is to help them find that meaning, and that can help pull them through. Second, and bringing this into the realm of business a bit, if we dovetail this with this premise that there is now an opportunity to transform ethics, values, and practices in business if we enter the stadium first, one thing you might consider is, when you scan the horizon of people who are traumatized or stuck in crisis response mode, identify those whose ethics, practices, and values align with your own, and bring them into your business fold. Because I predict that's going to be a significant determinant of stability of interest-based coalitions going into the business renaissance. And at the same time, it can extend a helping hand and bring people onto this life raft that we have. Perhaps it's a family office, perhaps it's a business that's very stable and got a large balance sheet. So that's my recommendation, is to find those with similar ethics, values, practices, and bring them into the fold. Now is the time to do that.
Thomas, thank you so much. It was a most interesting conversation. I look forward to seeing you soon, very soon. Next Tuesday, we have Jessica Fellows, my wife, talking to Celia Walden as part of our literary discussion. So hopefully you'll join us for that. I've been putting together the program for September through to December, and started to get quite excited about the prospect that actually we can do some in-person events. So I'm looking forward to getting over to Vienna. I'm looking forward to getting to New York, and that will certainly be our intention. And I should say to those of you from London that you will have seen that our first in-person event is at Spencer House on Thursday, the 1st of July. And I'm really pleased to have managed to invite Lord Sumption, who has been holding this government to account for the last 14 months in a very interesting fashion. And he's going to come and speak to us. So that's a great coup for us. And we have created something called the Forum Address. And this will be the first annual Forum Address given by Lord Sumption. But for the time being, no lesser Lord, Thomas Brown, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us.
You're kind.
And I should say, I didn't mention, I've read your book. You kindly sent this to me. And next time we can all meet, I'll make sure that all the forum members get a copy of it. So thank you so much, Thomas. Good luck to you, and goodbye to everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. It's good to see you all.
Thank you, sir.